In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about the importance of IQ in our modern society.
You might say, well, no way. It's like, well, you don't get to have an opinion on this, by the way, because the science has already been done. But I can tell you one fact that's pretty unsettling. So the United States Army has been doing IQ testing on its recruits since before World War I. They actually did a lot of the research that established IQ tests and validated them and indicated that they were reliable and so forth. And they had a variety of reasons for doing that. Partly, I guess, they didn't want to put incompetent people in charge of deadly machinery, which, does seem to be a reasonable proposition, I would say. But what they found as a consequence of their 100 years of testing was that you couldn't teach anybody with an IQ of 83 or lower anything at all that would make them anything but an obstacle to the tasks that the armed forces had to complete on a regular basis. So that's 83. So now in the United States, it's actually illegal to induct anyone into the armed forces if they have an IQ of 83 or lower. And that's more than 10% of the population. Now you got to think about that, because what it means is that approximately 10% of the population is sufficiently, has sufficiently low general cognitive ability that one of the complex enterprises that's chronically most desperate for manpower has decided that there's no point in even trying. Now, that's a dismal outcome. But I don't know exactly what you're supposed to do with that fact, but ignoring it doesn't seem to me to be the right thing, because it doesn't solve the problem. And this is going to become an increasingly present and unavoidable, unignorable problem. Because you know already that's what's happening in developed countries, less so in underdeveloped countries. But in developed countries, the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing. So for example, almost all of the increases in wealth that have accrued to people in the last 20 years have accrued to people who are in the top 1% of the distribution of wealth. And that's not going to stop, by the way. And part of the reason is that cognitive power has become even more valuable than it was 40 years ago, and the reason for that is computers, basically. Because if you're really smart and you're good with a computer, you're way ahead of someone who isn't very smart and who doesn't know how to use computers at all. And you're not just a little bit ahead. You're leaps and bounds ahead, and worse than that, you're getting farther ahead all the time. And the reason for that is that computational power keeps increasing, and it increases a lot. It's doubling about every 18 months. So part of the problem that the human race is going to have to face in the next 30 years, along with many other problems, is what are you going to do with people who have neither the cognitive ability nor the conscientiousness to find a niche in society that's actually, that other people will value enough to pay for? Because that's really the question. What do you do? Well, the conservative answer to that is, well, there's a job for everyone. It's like, no, that's wrong. There isn't. And the liberal answer is, well, everybody's the same, so it's just a matter of training. And that's also wrong. They're both of those positions are, the scientific research has rendered them permanently outdated.
What about like a liberal answer that consists of a basic income structure for people who may or may not have a position?
Well, there is the possibility of providing a minimum income. The question, what will that do, is completely unanswerable. We have no idea what it'll do. And I mean, it might stop people from starving to death, although I wouldn't say in North America that's generally not a problem people have anyways. But we don't know. See, I think of human beings as pack animals fundamentally, and this is just, it's a metaphor in some sense. I don't think that people can be happy unless they are burdened down with something, like a sled dog is burdened down with something. You have to have responsibilities. They have to be important responsibilities. You have to be sequenced in your time. Most of the people I have in my clinical practice, if they're not employed, they just fall apart. And the conscientious ones fall apart because they eat themselves up with shame and guilt. And the unconscientious ones fall apart because their sleep schedule goes all over the place. They don't eat regularly anymore. They do all sorts of impulsive things that are counterproductive. And, you know, they just sort of spiral into a pool of meaninglessness. So human beings are pretty social, and we're pretty altruistic, you know, in some weird manner. And it doesn't seem to me that people can live a life that's acceptable if all they have is enforced leisure. So maybe that'll be wrong. If you provided people with a base salary, maybe people would figure out what to do with their spare time, but I doubt it. I don't think people are, I think it's very, very difficult for people to regulate themselves in the absence of a certain minimum of social structuring and guidance. I've seen very, very few people who can conjure that up on their own and manage it for extensive periods of time. I think I've only met one person, I would say, in my whole life who's actually managed that. And that particular person has a very large array of talents and is extremely intelligent. So